Welcome to Trillions. I'm Joel Weber.
And I'm Eric Balchunas.
Eric, you're in London this week, and I was just there, but we're going to have an episode where we're going to talk about one of the big themes, I think, in Europe and the world right now. But maybe you've noticed Donald Trump, president of the U.S., changing a few things in strategic importance, and how Europe defends itself is going to be a really interesting area to watch. NATO, obviously the bedrock of sort of this transatlantic alliance that has really created stability, geopolitical stability in the world for 60 plus years. But there's some big questions about what Europe can do on its own. And of course, there's an ETF specifically geared at defense in Europe. What's that product?
Yeah, it's a really great product story and marketplace story as well, because when you have thematic ETFs, sometimes you don't know when your number is going to come up. And European defense almost seems like an oxymoron, not quite that far, but it was like, why would I buy that, right? All of a sudden, it's a hot area because they're scrambling to get better defense. And so all that money is people front running the stocks. So there's an ETF in the United States from Tuttle that already has close to $1 billion within a year, which is unbelievable. And then I was in Paris and we had a roundtable with some French issuers, and they were all talking about this mad scramble to launch homegrown European defense ETFs because the one here is a big hit. So kind of reminds me of like a couple themes in years past where something would happen in the news and the whole industry would just like scramble to meet the moment. And that's what you have here with this.
And joining us to talk through European defense ETFs is going to be Henry Jim, an ETF analyst with Bloomberg Intelligence. This time on Trillions, defense. Defense. Henry, welcome back to Trillions.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Okay, so give us a vibe check. How interesting is this space, having, kind of been a sleepy one for a long time?
Well, I don't know about sleepy. I just sort of like jumped onto the stage. I've been in ETFs for a couple of decades now. This is probably one of the biggest launches I've seen. The product in question is the Wisdom Tree European Defense ETF, WDEF. It launched in March, and it's already gathered 2.5 billion euros. That's almost $3 billion, which I've never seen anything here in Europe since I've been covering it.
That's U.S. equivalent, like 10 billion. I mean, that's such a big amount of money for that. And obviously, Trump was elected in November. He started to rough things up on the NATO front like a couple months after.
Having already done that in his first term. True.
Well, did the Wisdom Tree file right before did they foresee this, you think?
I'm sure they did. I mean, I don't know the exact timeline of when they filed, but it takes about 3 to 4 months to launch. So if they launched in March, they must have filed like back in November.
Probably right when he won, they launched. And they have that market to themselves, basically, or kinda.
No, as soon as they launched, I think within the first month or so, the first ones came right after them. So now we have seven European defense ETFs in less than 2.5 months.
So just let's stick with WDEF for a moment. What were they able to put in this fund that got people excited?
It's an index tracker. To be honest, I don't think it's exactly what they put into it. It's just an exposure, but the exposure looks pretty equitable, if not diversified. You got like the top holding is a German company that specializes in defense contracting. The top country represented is France. The second is UK. And the second top holding is the Italian company called Leonardo SPA, also one of the world's largest defense contractors. So actually, I think it's just exposure, not particularly what it is. It just had a whole smattering of European defense companies. And it's self-indexing, so they developed their own index, so they had control over what goes in at any time as well.
So, Eric, when you think about a category like this and you have an early mover like this, and how are people going to try and distinguish their products if there's going to be, 7+ of these things?
Yeah, they'll mix it up a little bit. You see some names in most of them. I mean, I'll be honest, I don't recognize a lot of these European defense names. I mean, the one had the name Spa, and I thought it was like for vacations. But Apparently that's what's that Italian word for what?
For ink.
Ink. Yeah. Anyway, I'm way out of my depths, Joel. But anyway, these companies are within this theme. Some will equal weight it. Some will modify equal weight it. That will change the volatility. Some will be cheaper. Some came on, try to be, we'll be the low cost one. It's like the way a category plays out over the course of like 3 years. This category played out in the course of like 3 months with everybody trying to angle a little differently. But it really is a story of first to market. And this is why we talk about first to market is so important and why people file stuff that seems a little crazy or ahead of its time. Because if you are first to market and you hit it right at the right time, it's really tough for any competitor to eat into your assets, even if they do have better performance, better cost, right? Are you finding that here? What percent of the total European defense theme does the Wisdom Tree one have?
Well, currently it's 93%. So,
93.
Yeah. I think a comparable is the Van Eck product that launched 3 years ago. It was a global defense ETF, and that was shortly after the conflict in Ukraine. They still hold 67% of the market share. And I don't know, nobody really saw it coming. So the first ones that launched were months or years after, and they haven't been able to dent into their market share. They've tried lowering their costs. They've tried going active. It's to no avail. Yeah,
it is so crucial. And the Van Eck one is global. So you can see why they launched that, because there's a couple global in the US, but it's the European part of that that's powering it. And then Wisdom Tree was European specifically. In the US, Joel, you know Matt Tuttle, we've had him on the show a couple times. He actually filed and launched the only European defense ETF in the US, EUAD is the ticker. And get this, it came out in October 2024. So I beat him today, and I asked him if he totally foresaw all this happening. He came out before the election, so he had to picture, okay, Trump won, would do this thing, and the stocks would go up. I was like, that's getting a lot right. And he goes, well, the way I saw it was, if Trump won, this would happen. But if Harris won, Russia would invade Europe. So he thought that would happen on the other side. He goes, either way, these stocks are going up. So this is part of why ETF issuers, in a way, are kind of like active managers. They're just not betting on like their own fund. They're betting in the marketplace that this thing will happen and it could happen. And he struck gold, Joel. This is almost $1 billion. It is up 60% in, I guess, since October, whatever that would be, 8 months or so. Unbelievable. Just perfect timing. I mean, it's a case study for the ETF history books.
So we've talked about this before, like Hack being one of the great launches, and it happened to be there, right place, right time. Is this the new Hack? Are we going to talk about EUAD as Hack?
Hack Junior.
Hack Junior.
But it would need to get to about $2 billion before we go, it's a new Hack. But it's well on its way. I mean, again, Hack, I believe it took a couple of years to get that amount, but this is very similar to that, I would say. The robotics ETF, Robo, was pretty similar. There's just been a couple of these moments where an issuer times it perfectly. On the flip side, there's times where it gets timed exactly the opposite and nobody cares. So it's interesting to highlight these things. And that's why, Joel, you got to put your line in the water before the fish come. These other issuers are coming after the fish already ate and they're swimming off to the other side of the line. It's too late. It's just like, it is, I like fishing. So the metaphor is pretty good. And got to give Van Eck and Wisdom Tree, to a degree, they were just early with their lines in the water with the right bait.
Okay, so what about where these things end up being listed? The filings that you mentioned, are those all U.S. filings?
No, the ones Henry mentioned are all already on the market in Europe.
So they're all there. And now, if Tuttle's in the U.S., like, is the U.S. the place for this, or is it going to be in Europe that's going to attract the assets, or is it just going to be performance chasing?
I think. Well, performance, I think there's still a long way to go. I mean, these military expenditures are multi-year cycles, right? I think it's just starting. And then the EU has, what do they call it? The Rearm Europe plan. They announced it early March. And then Wisdom Tree was actually kind of late because they launched in the middle of March. But I see, and how much did they commit? 800 billion, I think, over whatever timeline is. It's still a lot, and it's multi-year. cycle. So for the local ones, I would say yes, you would the place to be would be in Europe. I'm surprised there haven't been more launches in the U.S., to be honest.
I believe there's one filed. I forget from who, but it hasn't been the frenzy that it has in Europe. But Joel, Henry, if I'm right, there's a total of 4 billion between all of them. 4
billion? What, in the European defense one? Oh, no, it's like 2.6 billion. So
no, but if you add the global in.
If you add the global, it's like 11 billion already.
So 2 billion in European defense, and only 1 billion in U.S. European defense. That's really astonishing because normally the U.S. it just has a bigger pool of money. So whatever is popping, we will lead in assets. But this is the rare case where Europe is, possibly because the investors here are closer to that news.
Why do you think that is? Why would there be this much more interest?
Well, besides the home bias, there might be some links with the European Commission. So there might be some mandates for institutional investors to invest in European defense stocks. And this is the best way to do it. So there might be that aspect to it too.
Also, Europe's having a pretty good year overall. They're up, the main indexes are up like 23%, 25%. So I think it's got the attention of investors, but this is up double that, so this is like a shiny object within other shiny object. It's like the shiniest of the shiny. The other thing is, the thing with themes is, and even sectors and industries is, sometimes these industries get so beat up and left for dead, it doesn't take much to go up 60%. You only need a little. And this is where I give Tuttle credit because it reminds me of the uranium ETF that was filed after a 10-year bear market. Most issuers file after. Again, they're chasing the fish. Rarely does somebody put their line in the water where nobody's there and everybody's like left the area. It takes some guts and maybe some vision, but that's how you can catch a nice run, and then you can also be first. And so I would think more issuers would try to find spots that have been beaten up, left for dead, and nobody cares about, versus being the 8th European defense ETF and trying to get like a crumb. But I think these issuers are going on the road. They're talking to advisors, and I think the grassroots ask for these ETFs is there. So they're like, hey, they're calling the home office and saying, we actually need it. I got to recommend wisdom trees, or we have to launch one.
Yeah, and totally agree. I think it's also now an issue of distribution. For example, BNP Paribas came in at number 5 or 6, actually tracking a Bloomberg European Defense Index, and they've got 44 million, which is astounding. They're the second largest already. So that must be either internal assets or through their local brick and mortar distribution, right? So it's going to be all about distribution now. Wisdom Tree does not have physical distribution, and they've already gathered 2.5 billion euros. So, I think it's going to be a hand-to-hand combat on the distribution side now.
Like Joel, if BlackRock launched one right now, I bet they would get theirs, even if the Tuttle one is out. I think that's the point with BNP here. Some firms are just so big and powerful, they're just going to get theirs. But the mid ones and the small ones, if they're like 3rd or 4th, they're almost like dead in the water.
So, and Henry, we talked a little bit about the companies earlier. Are there any high flyers in here that are particularly interesting, especially since this is, a category that's going to be investing in many of the same companies?
Well, they're all pretty interesting. I mean, even Rheinmetall, the top holding from Germany, it makes up, I think, 15% of the fund. Year to date, it's returned 50%. And the top performing company was Rank, an armored vehicles company, also from Germany. It's returned 99% since March.
Imagine being that company and you're like making your tanks, and like you're like another day at the office, and like you read the news and the phone starts ringing, and you're like, oh my God, we don't have enough people. That seems like what happened, right? Like,
and it's really bringing Europe together because the third largest holding is actually BAE. That's British Aerospace Systems Holdings. So they're even though the UK is no longer part of the European Union, they're still part of Europe.
And they're willing to spend money
for 12%,
which is, I think, ultimately what this goes back to is sort of where we were talking at the beginning, Henry, of like if NATO and countries are willing to like really invest in these companies, then this sector, which maybe maybe was pretty sleepy and quiet for a long time, suddenly there's a lot of appetite.
Yeah, and these aren't even 2-3 year cycles, not even 5 years. We're talking 10, 20 year cycles, right? Once you put the contract in, it takes time to plan and to develop and then to launch and deploy, right?
Well, Henry, as long as we have you here, I want to ask you, what's it feel like to be beating the U.S. up for once?
It feels good.
Oh, there it is.
Is that your German?
I'm trying to German, yeah.
Look, Henry, it's taken forever to get to a point where Europe is outperforming the U.S. this year. And I know how Eric feels about this, but I want to hear it from you. How do you talk to Eric about why Europe is different this time?
Just look at the flows. I think Europeans are just had enough of putting their money all into the U.S. They put massive amounts of money from November all the way to March. And then suddenly when tariffs hit, they just say, okay, wait a minute, what's going on? So you see a reverse out of U.S. ETF, focus ETFs in April, right after tariffs. And they're saying, well, we better get our cash back, back to our own countries now.
Yeah, normally they invest half their money here, but this year they've invested only 3%. That said, they better get back on the train because the S&P has left the station, baby.
That's right.
All right, we'll leave it there. Henry, thanks so much for joining us on Trillions.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Trillions. Until next time, you can find us on the Bloomberg Terminal, Bloomberg.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you like to listen. We'd love to hear from you. Hit us up on social. I'm at Joel Weber Show. He's at Eric Balchinas. Trillions is produced by Magnus Henriksen. Brendan Newman is our executive producer. Sage Bauman is the head of Bloomberg Podcasts.